So I have a question for you. Have you been finding it hard to concentrate? Has it become increasingly more difficult to stay focused? If that's the case, then in this video, I'm going to show you why I think your concentration has gotten worse and exactly what to do about it. Now, please remember, these videos are based off my own life experiences and things that I've done to help myself. You should always do your own research, just as I did. Always speak to a mental health professional before trying any of these things and use your own discernment. So over the last year, I've noticed there have been an increasing amount of people either online or in my personal life that have either said directly or indirectly that they've been finding it harder and harder to concentrate. And so of course this interested me because I used to have severely bad concentration issues. So I started to think, why? Why is it all of a sudden there are so many people finding it hard to concentrate? So the first reason is because of the recent lockdown situations that have happened over the last couple of years. People have been experiencing high amounts of stress and their mental health has been severely affected because they've been either stuck indoors or because of other limitations as well. And this creates an entire recipe for high amounts of stress and trauma. So you can imagine people being indoors, this is going to be challenging in their relationships, they've been absorbing high amounts of social media, they've been probably using technology, video games, the mobile phone as a way to escape and as a way to cope with the situation, which is perfectly understandable. However, this is a double-edged sword because if, for example, you're spending huge amounts of time using your phone, using apps, this is actually over time decreasing our ability to focus and concentrate. And this is because a lot of these apps, especially when it comes to things like social media and some of the video games you can play on mobile, they are designed to be not just addictive, but they are designed to essentially hijack your attention span. So every time you start using these apps, they start learning through the algorithms the things that you like and the things that you don't like. So for example, you probably discovered this YouTube video because you've consumed similar content to my channel. And so the algorithm of YouTube knows you like this kind of content or that you may be interested in this content and has of course then shown you a thumbnail of this video and then you clicked it. So because you've done this, it learns and it's going to show you more and more of what it believes that you like. And so over time, it is showing you precisely what you like that will make you continue clicking and using the app or the website. This means that the more you do this, the more addictive it can become. And also many of these apps, for example, like TikTok, because they use very short form media, so videos that are maybe a minute or 2 minutes or even a few seconds. This means that in a way it is training us to only focus on things for a short amount of time. And every time you look at these things, it feels good. And so in your brain, it starts to release the chemical called dopamine. And dopamine is related to motivation, to reward, and to a bunch of other things as well. But when it comes to using these kind of apps and using the internet, it keeps reinforcing this behavior. So the more you use these apps, the more you're using the internet in this way with these kind of websites, the more it's training your brain, I believe it's training your brain to have a shorter and shorter attention span. So when you start watching something that's longer, you start focusing on something that involves you to need more focus and attention and time, it can become boring very, very quickly because I think it's as if your brain is expecting the reward and it doesn't come quickly, so then you move on to something else. This is what I've noticed from my own experiences and I've observed in others. Then there can be a knock-on effect where because your attention span has decreased and it's becoming harder and harder to focus and concentrate, this generates stress because not only are you already in, for example, in the past couple of years, the lockdown situations, which became, of course, stressful, now you can't focus enough. So when you have to do things and you can't concentrate, that's going to generate more stress. So I believe for many people, that's what they started to experience. And that's just one factor, because then you have to imagine if people are also consuming lots of news daily, so much of it is negative. And if you have the low concentration plus these apps and news apps, which are going to feed you more and more of the same kind of negative media, and you continue to look at it, then you're consuming more things that are going to stress you out. So I think this is probably what's happened for many people over the past couple of years. So those are just some of the first factors that lead to having a diminished ability to focus and concentrate. The next thing to think about is stress and trauma. So if these factors have created more stress and are building stress in people, well, what happens when you experience too much stress? Well, this is actually what leads to trauma, but not trauma like the way we normally think of. So I know most of the time when we think of trauma, we think of something significant and severe. So for example, experiencing violence, some kind of car crash, or some kind of disaster situation. That is of course traumatic, but there is a lesser known way that we can experience trauma. And I like to think of it as a slow burn trauma. So not something that's like explosive that happens immediately, but something that gradually builds up over time. So if you can imagine over the past couple of years, people experiencing increasing amounts of stress, there is only so much our mind and body and our nervous system can handle in terms of stress. And of course, the more stress that we experience, it becomes increasingly more difficult to focus and concentrate. When you're experiencing high levels of stress, this is then when you start to experience anxiety. And when you experience anxiety, this makes it so that your mind is focused on anything that can be a potential threat, whether that's a psychological threat or a physical threat. Imagine if then all the time you're in this state, or most of the time in that state, your focus is going to be put, so your mind is going to take your focus and put it on the things it thinks are a potential threat, because it wants to protect you and it wants you to deal with that. And this is another reason then why it becomes so difficult to concentrate. Because if you've had these previously mentioned factors, so now you're in a stress state and this stress has built up over time, now you're experiencing a kind of trauma where your body and your mind think that you're under threat most of the time. And when this becomes too much, when you experience too much stress, this is what trauma is. So trauma can be a singular event that is mentally, emotionally, or even physically overwhelming, but it can also be one that gradually builds up over time until your mind and your body, especially your nervous system, cannot handle it because it's overwhelming. And this is then when we start to experience issues like having memory loss, or the ability to focus becomes difficult. So you start losing the ability to concentrate. And of course, this is where other mental health issues come from, like the thing I talk about on my channel. So this is where things like maladaptive daydreaming can start. This is where things like depersonalsation disorder can start. And I'll put links in the description below if you want to learn more about that. So you may be listening to this and think, well, okay, yeah, some of this seems reasonable and very obvious. But there is another factor that I think has been massively overlooked. And it's not just these couple of years that have created stress and trauma for people. It's also past unresolved traumas and stress that stay in our mind and our body. So that might sound strange, so I will explain a bit further. So when we experience high amounts of stress that can become a trauma in our past, and if we don't learn how to resolve and release that, it stays stuck within our bodies and our mind. So when I say stuck in our body, I'm really referring to our nervous system. So our nervous system, if we experience enough stress and a certain amount of trauma, what I noticed in myself, and based on talking to other people and things that I've read, the nervous system doesn't fully relax and stays in a sensitive state. So for me, for example, I experienced the dissociative disorder, depersonalization disorder, because I believe my nervous system became so hypersensitive because of so many stressful and traumatic experiences that pretty much every little thing could be interpreted as some kind of threat to my well-being, whether that was psychological, emotional, or physical. And so this is where all these mental health issues I experienced came from, this very hypersensitive, hyper-alert nervous system and mind. So because this stress and trauma doesn't truly leave us until we resolve it, when you then experience, let's say, the lockdown situations over the past couple of years, this is then when unresolved traumas come to the surface. So things that people didn't know were there, traumas that they didn't know how to resolve, that is then when they come up again. Because now that you're in a situation where things do come across as being scary and threatening, your traumas will come up because you're now in that sensitive state. Your body could be more in that hypersensitive state because you're in a stressful experience. So because of the past couple of years of people being in a more stressful state, this is then when their unresolved traumas come up. Because when you're in a more stressful situation, that is when your previous stresses and traumas are going to release. And the reason why they come up again is, firstly, the trauma gets stored within us. This is because when we experience something that's so overwhelming, most of the time we couldn't actually fully process it and deal with it at that time. So I believe what happens is the mind and body suppresses it so that later on down the line, you can resolve it. And then when you experience what is known as a trigger, so when you experience something that is similar to the traumatic event of the past, that is then what makes the actual trauma come up again. So let's say in the past you had an experience where you felt under threat and it was too much to handle. It's possible then that your mind and body suppress this inside of you so that you don't have to actually deal with it there and then. Instead, you can do what you need to do to overcome the situation. So for example, let's say somebody thought they were going to be attacked on the street and it was very scary and had to run away. Let's just use that as an example. That would be understandably for many people very scary and overwhelming. But in that moment, you don't want to experience the trauma because then you might not survive. So instead, your body and mind suppresses that. And this can be through memory, this can be through your actual body where, I know this sounds strange, but I do believe that the emotion itself can get suppressed in the body, and I'll talk about that at some point a bit more. But also the memories can be suppressed. So you may go through a traumatic experience and never even remember it, but your body and mind did the exact thing to protect you. It's suppressed this so that you can get through the experience and it doesn't cause problems for you there and then. Then later on, let's say during all these lockdown situations, once again, now you may be in a situation where your body and mind feel really threatened, like in the past. So that is the trigger, and then the unresolved trauma comes back up. It's triggered it again. And I believe this happens because these traumas and these traumatic events in your memories, they don't want to be suppressed. I don't think your mind and body actually wanted to stay there. So instead, the healthy option is it brings it back up to release it. And if that sounds strange, I know when I first heard it, I thought it was weird, but through various practices on how to release stress and trauma, I actually believe this is actually how it works. And the way you release the stress and the trauma is when it does get re-triggered. What I did, and again, you should always speak to a mental health professional before trying any of this. What I did was, if I would experience a trigger from a past trauma, and if memories came back, if the emotions came back that were overwhelming, because I was older, more experienced, I would actually purposefully, fully let myself have the experience. So I wouldn't actually escape the stress or the trauma. So for me, that's how I processed trauma. When the trigger would occur, let's say it was during lockdowns, I would let the feeling come up, I would let the experience come up, and I would fully experience them. And you essentially pass through the trauma, and that's then how it gets released. And then the same triggers can come, but the traumatic events don't get re-triggered because you've released them. And once these experiences, once these traumas and stresses, what I found once I did release them, it became so much easier to concentrate, because being in these lockdown situations or similar situations before where these triggers were coming up, you don't have these thoughts from the past and unresolved issues coming up. So they're not hijacking your concentration, your focus. And I also highly recommend that you may need to actually go and speak to a therapist to fully explore these kind of triggers that could be affecting your focus and concentration, because they will be able to help you to not only just help to mentally process it, but they can help you to teach you how to physically and emotionally process it too. Other things you can do if there is a buildup of stress and trauma which is affecting your concentration and focus is through physical activities. So as I mentioned before, I do believe really that stress and trauma do get not just trapped and suppressed in our mind, but also in our very bodies. And what I found is through regular exercise, through stretching, and through breathing techniques, especially if you're experiencing, with the breathing techniques, especially doing deep breathing if you have a traumatic trigger come up. This I found significantly helps to release the stress and the trauma, which then over time I found was significantly helping my concentration to improve. So some people, for example, I've heard of people in the middle of yoga. I actually don't do yoga, but I've heard stories where people will be doing yoga and they will feel an emotional release. So they may feel like they want to cry. They may feel like laughing huge amounts. They may feel angry. I've heard of stories where people are getting massages, for example, and then they feel an emotional release all of a sudden. And to me, this points to evidence that on some level, our nervous system or parts of our body probably do contain somehow, I'm not sure how, the actual emotional information related to a past stress and trauma. So I found from my own research, from my own direct experiences, especially with stretching, deep breathing, and regular exercise, I found that these things did actually, over time, release stress that had built up, which then for me, of course, made it significantly easier to focus and concentrate because these traumatic thoughts and past memories weren't just coming up again. Another factor that I've noticed most likely contributed to people's concentration getting worse is bad sleeping habits. That might sound obvious, but I've noticed that, of course, because of how stressful the last couple of years have been for people, this is going to affect their sleep. I think we all know when you don't sleep properly, especially when it's long-term sleep issues, it dramatically affects your ability to focus and concentrate. This happens because when you haven't fully rested, our body, especially our nervous system, it still stays stuck in that fight and flight state. This is also known as the sympathetic nervous system. So when your sympathetic nervous system is activated, it still is in that threat detection mode. So you never really are resting. And because of this, your mind is really more focused, I believe, becomes more focused on looking for potential threats in a very subtle and subconscious way. So that makes it so much harder to focus and concentrate. So I've now covered the factors of what leads to concentration issues. So using the social media and apps and video games too much, as an example, the stressful background and traumatic experiences people have had over the past couple of years, the potential that that situation then triggers past unresolved traumas and stresses. But let's say, for example, that you have dealt with that. Let's say that you've done that, which is fantastic. Because you've been in that situation for so long, don't forget that concentration is a skill. It's a learnable skill. So in the same way that if these past years have retrained and reconditioned your mind to have a much lower level of concentration and focus, don't forget that because concentration is a skill, you can improve your concentration and attention span. And I find it interesting that many times over the years, especially when we're kids, maybe we're told, oh, you need to concentrate more. Maybe we tell ourselves these things, and yet whoever taught us to concentrate? Concentration is such a vital skill for everything we do, yet pretty much nobody, in terms of, let's say, the bigger scale of things and globally, is really focusing on teaching people how to concentrate. The only people I notice who really do this and have been doing this for thousands of years are the various monks and gurus and other people who teach things like meditation. To get good at something, we have to be taught it or we have to learn and practice it. So if you want to improve your concentration, apart from removing the things and releasing the things that are getting in the way of the good concentration, you then have to retrain yourself to be able to concentrate. Although I do talk about on the channel a lot meditation, I have spoken more about mindfulness meditation. This is something that I've practiced every day for the past 6 years, changed my life in the best ways possible. But the other type of meditation, and specifically for this, you want to focus on learning and practicing daily concentration-based meditations, because there is mindfulness-based meditations and also concentration-based meditation. And the simple way I learned to do this was I used to light a candle, small candle, and I would I would start with just 5 minutes, just a couple of minutes a day. I would keep my attention, I would put away all distractions, And for just 5 minutes, you can even set a timer, I would just focus on the candle flame. And when I notice my attention going away, I bring it back to the candle. And I just keep doing that for 5 minutes every day. If you can increase it, that's great. But some people can find that very difficult. So even if you can't do 5 minutes, just do your best, even do a couple of minutes if you can't do 5. And it is like, you'll find it's like a muscle. The more and more you do this every day, you won't notice results immediately, probably not, but it's like going to the gym. If you go to the gym for a week, you're unlikely to see any major results. If you go to the gym for a month or two, then you're going to really start seeing results. So that's why I suggest that you do. And of course, always practice fire safety when you're using candles. Don't leave a burning candle unattended. Always make sure that it's in view. I know I have to say that even though it's obvious. You can also do other types of concentration-based meditation where you simply focus on your breathing as you're going about your daily tasks during the day. So if you notice your concentration is not as good during a particular period of time, just bring your attention back to your breathing and just notice how you're breathing. But the whole point of all of these types of concentration-based meditation, I recommend that you look online for other types of ones that suit you. The entire point of this is you are exercising the mental muscle of controlling your attention. So when you notice your attention going somewhere else, because you've practiced this, moving this muscle of your attention, you can easily bring it back to the point of what you want to focus on. So I hope this video has been useful. If you like this video, don't forget to click the like button, and if you want to be notified when I release the next one, don't forget to click subscribe as well. And let me know in the comments, what kind of concentration issues have you been having or have you observed in others? I'd like to hear from you. Take care.